So we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Hi, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Engendering Data webinar. My name is Ara Go. I'm Senior Program Manager at IFPRI, and also the Program Manager for the Methods module of the Gender Impact Platform. While we wait for everyone to get settled, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available in the chat afterward. And please keep your microphone muted through the presentation to avoid any background noise. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to put them in the chat during the presentation, or use the raise hand feature to ask it verbally during the Q&A. And before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to briefly give you just some background context about the 3 webinars that we'll be hosting this month and the next. So last year, I think around this time, late last year, the Gender Impact Platform awarded grants to 3 CGI research initiatives to apply Women's Empowerment Agriculture Index, or WEAI, to climate change research. So the goal of these grants was to better integrate women's empowerment and climate change into the CGI portfolio, and also to inform the development of a new add-on module of pro-WEAI on climate change. And the selected 3 projects are linked to 3 different CG initiatives: Mitigate Plus, Her Plus, and Nexus Gains. And these projects collected data this year, and as they progress in analyzing the data, we wanted to organize this webinar series to share their findings, lessons learned, and also gather some feedback and insights from all of you. So today's webinar is the first in the series, and the Mitigate Plus team here will present their study titled Strengthening Women's Empowerment and Inclusion in the Living Lab for People Approach for Climate Resilient Low Emission Food System Development in Kenya and Colombia. We'll have 4 speakers today. I can just go over very quickly, and then you can just see the full bios in the invitation. So we have Anne Rietveld, who's a scientist at the Alliance of Biodiversity, SIAD. She leads this project. And Diana Muambi is a research associate at IRI. And Hannah Ewell is a research specialist at the Alliance. And last but not least, Martha Venegas is a senior research associate also at the Alliance. Okay, I think I covered everything before we actually go ahead and get started. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Anne to kick us off. Over to you, Anne.
Yes, thank you, Ara. Let me put my my PowerPoint. Please let me know when you can see the slides.
Yeah, we can see the slides, not in full screen yet.
But now they are, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, well, Ara already mentioned the title, which I shortened a little bit in this presentation. So it's about strengthening women's empowerment and inclusion in the living lab for people in Kenya and Colombia. And apart from the people already mentioned, we also have David on our team, and he supported data collection, or no, not data collection, but data analysis in Kenya. Ara said Mitigate Plus. We nowadays call this initiative Low-Emission Food Systems Initiative. And this initiative is about supporting low-emission food systems development in developing countries, which contribute to development trajectories to net zero emission. And we support countries in reducing emissions and enhancing carbon sinks in a manner that does not threaten production and is consistent with the Paris Agreement. And we particularly work in these 4 countries: China, Colombia, Kenya, and Vietnam. And for this project, we only work in Colombia and Kenya. So what is a living lab for people? This is something that was developed in one of the work packages of this initiative. And it's basically about moving towards more transdisciplinary approaches to really engage local stakeholders in shaping innovation processes. And we defined this as an inclusive and diverse space for people to design, test, demonstrate, and advance their social technical innovations and associated modes of governance within a certain facilitated organizational structure. And this structure implies that we are hosted also by local organization, or that this living lab is hosted by a local organization, and that we collaborate on basis of the aspiration and needs and wishes of local stakeholders. So for this, so we applied for this grant in 2023 because we felt that that it was actually responding to a need we had in this living lab to involve more deeply with gender equality and women's empowerment. And we were hoping that if we would get this grant and do this research, that we could inform the future trajectories of the living labs for people, and that we could particularly strengthen the ability of the teams in the living labs to deliver on gender equality and social inclusion outcomes. So very briefly, what we've done with this project is we applied the pro-WEAI in the living lab in Kenya, and in both countries we identified emic definitions of empowerment, and we generated evidence on the interaction between women's empowerment and interventions targeting climate resilience and mitigation. So most of us in this team are from the Alliance, and the Alliance is also managing the work in Colombia. And then in Kenya, this work is managed by ILRI, and we have Diana on the team from ILRI. And then IFPRI is also a team, a member of the low emission food systems initiative team. And of course, we also worked with IFPRI for this particular grant. And our in-country partners who are hosting these living labs in Colombia and Kenya are Gavriana University and the Kaimozi Agricultural Research and Training Center. So our overarching research question for this project is: how can innovative participatory research approaches, such as this living lab for people, incorporate women's empowerment in their design and also contribute towards improving gender equality in the context of climate resilient and low emission food system development? And then we had a number of sub-questions, and I will not read them out all, but we basically wanted to know more about the status of women's empowerment in the two sites. And we also had sub-questions focusing on intersectionality. And then we also wanted to identify the potential for supporting empowerment. And in Kenya, we looked in this regard especially at different sectors and value chains. And in Colombia, we looked more at women's organizations working in the livestock sector. And then we also were interested in structural constraints and opportunities in relation to different kinds of collectives, so women's groups or farmers organizations and those kind of collectives. So now I will hand over to Diana, who will tell you more about the data collection in Kenya, and especially the quantitative data collection. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Anne.
Go ahead.
Yeah, your slides are not moving.
Is that for everyone the case, that the slides are not moving?
No, we're in the right slide, I think. Kenya data collection, right?
Yes.
At the top, yeah.
Oh, good.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it's your connection, Diana, but yeah, we have the right slide here.
Okay,
so
let me just go on. Let me use message.
Okay. And then let me know when you want to move to the next slide,
So
please.
for the quantitative Okay. Okay, so we did manage to apply the pro-WEAI questionnaire to a total of 472 respondents from 253 households. And just maybe to explain these numbers, so according to the WEAI guidelines, we are supposed to talk to two adult people in one household, an adult male and adult female. But then we didn't manage to do that in a number of households, that is 34 households. So that is why we have 472 respondents from 253 households. So we did a 1-week training in early May, and then we proceeded with the data collection the rest of the month, which we finished in 31st of May 2024. And then we also did a few changes in the pro-WEAI questionnaire, where we took out some few sections and questions which were identified as possible takeouts from the WEAI guideline. And then we also separated tea from horticultural crops, such that we have tea and other horticultural crops, because we wanted to focus on tea farming now that it's largely practiced in Nandi County. And then we also added a section on climate change, where we examined experiences, perceptions, and mitigation strategies, including the challenges that farmers in Nandi County are facing in adapting to climate change. And so on to the results. For the pro-WEAI empowerment results, we did calculate the 3DE and the gender parity. And the 3DE is the 3 domains of empowerment, which basically measures the adequacy of each individual in the 3 different domains of pro-WEAI, which are instrumental, intrinsic, and collective agency. And so we can see from the result that men are slightly empowered as compared to women, since they are at 0.709 and women at 0.669. And then on the gender parity index, which basically measures women's empowerment relative to men in their households, to see the intensity of gender parity, is also at 0.886, which is slightly above average, but still shows some room for improvement. And so it is from the 3DE and the gender parity index that we get the pro-WEAI score, which is 0.691. And this is an average of 90% for the 3DE and 10% of the gender parity index. That is how we get the 0.691, and that is now the empowerment score for women in Nandi County from our sample. And then we also get to see the percentages of the population from our sample that don't achieve empowerment, which has a slight difference, with women having 79% and men at 72%. So that is those are some brief results, empowerment results from the study. And then we also go deeper to analyze how each and every indicator in the pro-WEAI contributes to disempowerment between men and women. So this particular graph, as you can see for the women, the indicators that stand out in contributing to disempowerment include work balance, self-efficacy, and autonomy in income. And then for the men, we can also see that autonomy in income stands out, followed by income control and also a bit of self-efficacy. And then it's also a bit clear that one indicator that least contributes to disempowerment for both men and women is asset ownership, which is closely followed by group membership. And then we also tried to compare our empowerment results with the climate change section, and we tried to put one of the graphs that we have in that section. And this shows how worried people are in climate change, about climate change in comparison with their empowerment scores. And we clustered them from those that are highly empowered to medium and then to low. And we can see that most people are actually not worried, not really worried about climate change. And some are a bit worried. They're worried to a small extent. And then those that are very worried are led by the highly empowered ones, because we can see for men we have 45.6% and for women it's 40.9%. So those that are highly empowered are also the ones that are very worried about climate change. Yeah, and that is a summary of some of the results that we have. I'll now hand it over to Hannah to take us through the qualitative results. Thank you.
Hi, Hannah. Are you taking
Hannah?
over? You're muted, maybe. Is Hannah still online? Because I can't see it.
Hannah, can you hear us? Mm.
What
She's
shall
in
we
the
do?
meeting. She's in the
Okay.
meeting. She's muted.
Can we, Hannah, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, I'm so sorry.
Oh.
My computer completely froze. So, gosh, embarrassing that happens, especially with time constraints and in a recorded webinar. Apologies
No
for that.
worries.
So now I'm joining on my phone, but I can see the screen well. So, we complemented the pro-WEAI survey in Nandi, Kenya, with 2 different qualitative methods so that we could understand women and men's experiences and perceptions around empowerment. So getting at some of those emic or kind of locally defined empowerment experiences, and also their agency and opportunity spaces to participate in household and community processes. So we did that through 4 focus group discussions, which applied the capacities for innovation tool coming out of the Genovate suite of methods, and also 8 interviews where we applied the life histories tool that was part of the GAP2 protocols that are associated with the WEAI. So next slide, please, Anna.
Yes.
So what we did in terms of understanding local perceptions is in focus groups, we asked about defining empowerment as well as looking at how they perceive an admired person. And interestingly, empowerment was mostly defined in economic terms. So in terms of their financial status and also their income generating opportunities, versus what was described by the participants on what they admired in a person. It was much more in terms of the personality traits and the achievements they had. So much more in terms of the support function, for example, in the community. And interestingly, the empowered individuals were expected to uplift others. That was really reflecting a strong community value. And in this case, we also actually found negative perceptions of empowerment, that this could also increase, for example, threat of theft from empowered households. Women in particular face constraints in terms of limited access to capital, land ownership, and time constraints, which resulted in triple burdens in the sense that those women were able to access income generating opportunities such as small businesses ended up still having to take care of the family and also have care responsibilities for elders, for example, as well as very strong cultural norms which still position men as the primary decision makers. So next slide, please. Another really strong component that came out was the role of social networks and collective empowerment. So community groups in Nandi provide a very strong platform for sharing knowledge and pooling of financial resources, particularly for women. So they join these self-help groups where they have merry-go-round financing, for example. And in addition to that, these groups also offer social support, and they also name this as offering a buffer against economic and climate shocks. So in case they, for example, have a health emergency in the family, they're able to rely on these groups. And they also feel more confident together, which was something that was quite interesting in the sense that this connects to the climate component. The barriers to participation was often time constraints, that they weren't even able to attend the meetings, and also financial limitations to be able to contribute the monthly payments, for example, that were expected. Also, mismanagement was named as a challenge. Next slide, please. Lastly, in the connections between empowerment and climate resilience, climate change outcomes, so for example, increased prevalence of rainfall was perceived as affecting men and women equally. But what stood out was the difference in terms of the resilience capacities of women. So they faced in particular limited resources to support proactive climate measures. So they did have some kind of adaptive measures that were incremental, such as changing the practices that they had, or adopting climate resilient varieties, planting trees, for example. And this image on the right is actually quite interesting. This was a woman who had experienced increased prevalence of disease with her chicks, and then her adaptive measure was actually moving them indoors into her kitchen, that they were warmed by the fire and also not exposed to rain. The absorptive capacity was interesting, that as I just explained, the community support, so these social networks really provided a strong buffer, but overall they weren't really, or they didn't feel that they had sufficient resources to really make fundamental shifts in their practices, and this was really a result of lack of funding and training. So we found that this was really interesting to complement what we found in the survey results. I'll now hand over to Marta to cover, apologies. One more on our end is that at the end of this month, we're actually planning a feedback workshop where we're excited to be able to share some of the findings and actually focus on discussion with stakeholders. And this ideally can link back to our aim to address some of the constraints within the current activities of the Living Lab for people, and try and integrate these into future actions. And what we're using there is a transformative approach that has been used in several CGIAR examples, but this is forum theater, which is a very interactive approach in which short skits are generated, and these we generated together with a theater group that we're engaging based in Nairobi, that are able to then develop short skits based on these results. And we're having these for two different groups. So for one of them is for the farmers, and the second is more for stakeholders from the county government in Nandi, as well as the advisory board of the Living Lab for People. And what stands out in regard to this method is that they perform skits, and then the participants are able to engage as what's called spect actors. So they're able to intervene and also change the course of the skit. And this is followed by group reflection and feedback. So we're really hoping that this is going to be able to support addressing some of these difficult topics around gender norms and women's empowerment in a space that still is quite restrictive for women. So now I'm happy to hand over to Marta for the Colombia case. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Before I start telling you a little bit about the Colombian case, I will cut my camera just to make sure that I have a stable internet connection. So basically, in Colombia, we work in Caquetá. We only conducted the qualitative methods, basically due to budget constraints. And what we wanted to do was to understand women and men's perception and experiences of empowerment, their agency, and as well the opportunities that they have for innovation, and the participation that they have as well in decision making in the household at the community level as well. We did focus group, 4 focus group discussions based in the qualitative protocol of WEAI, and we also conducted 11 interviews. with different stakeholders. Like as Anne mentioned, we work with women that were livestock producers and that belong to different associations, only female associations, but as well to other type of associations. And we as well conducted a visioning workshop in which we wanted to see as well what needed to be changed in the livestock sector to kind of foster woman empowerment. However, I will not be able to tell you that much the results of this workshop because it just happened last week. Next one, please. And so basically, regarding the local perceptions of empowerment, so it is often defined as like an equitable sharing of household and caregiving duties. And it's also related to the value of their work. So when they say that they feel empowered when their work is valued, they mean in the, of course, and the productive sphere, but as well in the community, but as well in the household. Like sometimes they feel that the work on the household that they do is not that much value, and for them it's important that this type of work is also valued. An empowered person should as well have a decision-making power and be kind of on this personal development and growth, and always respecting other people's work. They also mentioned that a woman that is empowered is a woman that moves beyond traditional gender roles. So basically that take leadership roles at different associations, not only productive associations, but also other type of associations. And of course, as well, to recognize that women have also the ability to lead, the ability and the capacity to lead, and to contribute not only in the family sphere, but also at the community level. They also mentioned some challenges. So the same as in the Kenya case, they mentioned the time constraint and the triple burden that they have if they want to really engage to leadership roles. They also mentioned that they have limited training and education. Even if they work in the livestock sector, they don't have that much technical knowledge, and that sometimes hinders their capacity to take decisions. There is as well a lack of land ownership, and basically due to this limited training and education in the technicalities of the livestock sector, men still are the primary decision makers. Please, Anne, can you move to the next one? And here regarding the social networks or the groups and organizations that they belong, so they see this association as spaces that provide them like mutual support, knowledge sharing, and community involvement, but as well help them to gain access to information about trainings, about meetings, and about different processes that are happening in the communities. As well, the woman involvement in the associations, and particularly in those associations where there is more predominantly female participation, allows them to take leadership responsibilities, and as well to access to other type of resources that help them as well to engage in activities that are more addressed for income generating, and they feel that this also helps them in improving their decision-making capacity. This type, no, can you go back? Sorry. This type of associations as well, they mentioned that it has served as a platform to kind of to challenge traditional gender roles, basically because they feel that the men has been transforming their perceptions and being more encouraging and supporting towards women. At the beginning, when women start to be part of associations, of female associations, it was many men were kind of against and thinking that it was a waste of time, but with the time they have shown that they have really growth, and that this get reflected as well in the households, so they are becoming more supportive. However, of course, there are still barriers that doesn't allow these type of associations to grow in number. So basically time constraints, as mentioned before, but as well the access to the information, and as well the fact that there are still a lot of men that are not really supportive with the woman. So many women still cannot participate because they need to have the permission from the men. And now next one, please. And regarding climate change, basically, like there is this general perception that men and women are equally affected by climate change. However, women are more actively involved in implementing sustainable practices that help them to cope with climate change. So, for example, reforestation, home gardens, or even silvopastoral systems. And because of this, they recognize that climate change action toward climate change should be a shared responsibility, but they still think that because they are already engaged in these sustainable practices that they consider that are important to cope and to respond to climate change, they should be the primary decision makers regarding these kind of activities, and kind of this role that they feel they have as leaders in environmental sustainability in the regions make them kind of shift this narrative that of women as maybe victims of climate change, but start to see themselves more like leaders in implementing solutions towards climate change. So this is a little like overview of the results in Colombia, and now I give back the floor to Anne. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Marta, and also thank you, Diana and Hannah. So one little wrap up. I think in Nandi, what stood out, so in Nandi is Kenya, that in the survey or in the pro-WEAI survey, we didn't find enormous differences between women's and men's empowerment. We basically found that both are disempowered. But then when you look at the qualitative data, a very different picture emerges in which we do find much stronger evidence on women's disempowerment vis-a-vis the empowerment of men. So we were we are surprised by that, and we're also a bit struggling with interpreting this, but this is also still work in process. And then more in relation to climate resilience or vulnerability to climate or the capacity to innovate, I think one finding from us, or one maybe more a conclusion, is that this relational aspect is very important. So if we do want to move towards a WEAI module or something that is more informative or telling in regards to climate, we should strengthen this, and that also includes how we measure collective empowerment or how we assess collective empowerment. In relation to that, the WEAI survey is, of course, mostly focusing on decision-making on the household level, whereas we find that for climate resilience, of course, this often also includes a lot of community decision-making, community action. So it would probably be good to give more attention to that level. And then from other work, and also here, and we did a little study on this in 23 or end of 22 in Nandi County, is also more the individual character of people in relation to resilience. So this idea that, even in a certain situation in which you might have, for instance, in Kenya, two women with similar in a similar context with similar conditions, but they still feel very different about their own vulnerability to climate change, and they also might undertake very different actions to become more resilient to climate change. And we feel that this is often also due to their personality traits, and this is also not really captured. And then we also found that women, especially in the Kenya case, that women were often less informed about what climate change is, what it means, and also about climate adaptation measures or climate smart agriculture. So it would also be probably important to measure this and to also see to what extent an improved skill set, for instance, in regards to climate smart agriculture, also influences empowerment. And then last but not least, we didn't do the survey in Colombia, but in Kenya, we did them more or less at the same time, or at least we designed them at the same time, so they did not inform each other. But ideally, we would first do a qualitative study prior to the quantitative, to really take that local context more in, to integrate our understanding of the local context better, also in some of the survey questions that are that we can adopt. So that was it for us. I don't know if Diana, Hannah, or Marta want to add something, but otherwise I'll give the floor back to you, Ara.
All right, thank you, and Diana, Hannah, and Martha for a great presentation. We can open it up to the floor for questions and comments. I see the very first question from Peter about the presentation. I think Hannah thumbed up, so that means yes. Yeah, great. And Hazel and Agnes had some comments about the WEAI results. And Hazel's question was also answered by Hannah. Any comments, further comments or questions about those?
I have a comment regarding the first question of Peter, and what I mean is that, like in Colombia, that is where where I mentioned this, is that women, they feel that they are already engaged in sustainable practices, and they are starting to see their role, because in the livestock sector, they see the men more like in address more to the productivity of the production system, and women are seeing like they are like leading more towards this sustainability of the system. So that is why they think that they should be the main responsibles, the main decision makers, but they agree that it's a shared responsibility and that they have to, of course, be both involved in the decision-making processes. That is what I meant. I hope it's clear.
Thanks, Martha. I think Peter actually had a long sort of questions. Would you like to come in and ask the questions?
All right, thank you so much. Yes, I can come in and ask the question. Thank you so much. My name is Peter. I'm at the Center for Development Research, ZEF University of Bonn in Germany. I really enjoyed the presentation so much. And then whilst going through the presentation, I was reflecting on two main things. One from the Kenyan case, where they reported of the Women Empowerment in Agriculture Index. And I was asking myself, prior to measuring this empowerment level within the study context, did they implement any intervention after which they measured the empowerment, or they just measured the current existing empowerment among people in these communities? And then the second follow-up question to that is level of intersectionality. When I was looking at the results, I didn't see so much report on intersectionality. It provides a kind of a harmonized result that women in this study context are always the same, but that is not true. Within women, within gender, you will find different levels of intersectionality and increased levels of capacity, access to resources and everything, even among women. So if you measure this kind of empowerment, it's good for you to also bring out the nuances of different women within the society or environment, so that if you're making policy decisions, you are more targeting people who have some kind of characteristics that makes them more disenfranchised or more disadvantaged compared to other women. And the same applies to men, because you would find some level of men who may have the same characteristics as women who are disadvantaged, and therefore I was expecting that the ones in the presentation. And then the second question in relation to Colombia has been answered. So thank
Yeah, maybe as a short reply, I mean, we have many more results from also the quantitative WEAI, of course, and we are currently working on a report which will also feature a lot of these results. But in this presentation, yeah, we basically gave everyone 3 slides to present some first results. But maybe I can hand over to Diana or to Hannah to respond more in detail on this question, because it was mostly regarding the Kenya case, I think. Do you want to respond, Diana?
Hannah, please go ahead. Let Hannah respond.
Sure, no problem. So to your first question, and now it seems my internet is back. So to your first question, it wasn't implemented in the sense of like pre and post and intervention, the way sometimes the WEAI is. So in this case, it was just a one-time collection as kind of the stock take, as Anna mentioned. So yeah, so it's the current status now. And it might be really interesting to do it again in several years, and to certainly then to have it be more an evaluation type of approach on how maybe the Living Lab for People has adjusted certain practices, and then re-survey, but that wasn't the intention within our case. And then regarding intersectionality, it's a really good point. It's also something we planned to address. The WEAI itself, of course, doesn't necessarily differentiate so strongly because it is looking at women and men and the parity and these empowerment indicators for women more generally. But it is something that we do want to address in the report because, as Anna mentioned, this is where we can go into more depth, and we did collect different demographic indicators. So there we can actually end up providing a more intersectional picture. I hope that addresses the questions, but it's certainly a very good point, Peter.
Thank you. We have one question. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering how worry about climate change is attributed to low or high empowerment.
So we do have David. Yeah, I think we have David on the call. I don't know if you're here right now, David, but what we tried to do here is cluster empowerment results. But David, if you're here, please come in. Otherwise, I'll try and cover it.
But maybe we were wondering if indeed the extent to which people worry about climate change and climate change events or adaptation to climate change, to what extent this is correlated to their level of empowerment. And well, from these first results, it seems that it is not that much related, but that people that are more empowered worry slightly more about climate change. So I don't think David is on the call. I don't see him anyway.
Okay, sorry. I saw him come in. Maybe he dropped off.
I'm here.
Okay.
Hi, David.
Hi,
Do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, basically, we didn't really look at like now how to decide whether to decide on that statement, or rather the statement in the question whether women are the primary determinants for decision makers. But though I think we can do that analysis and include in the results when sharing the presentation. So looking at the level in which women really influence decision making.
Thanks, David. Yeah, certainly that's something we can look at. So we looked at several connections between empowerment and climate change. One of the other ones was also in terms of their constraints. So that linked more closely with the WEAI indicators, for example, limited access to credit and and decision making, as you just mentioned, David. And then also access to information was one of the key constraints to farmers making certain, like adopting certain practices that were a response to climate change. But it's something that we want to go into more in the report, and we really just have preliminary results at this stage.
Okay, great. Yeah, Agnes also had a comment about that point.
And I agree very much with Agnes. And Jumai is also again commenting on that, I think. I think, we were just curious, basically. So we were wondering, as I said, but so this, we showed this result because we think it's an interesting result in itself. And indeed, maybe people that are more empowered are more informed, so they have more to worry about, basically. But I agree that, that we cannot, at least not now, attribute any causality in this. To respond to Jumai's question, if people that are more empowered worry less, what could be the empowerment? Okay, well, I think I answered that more or less, right? Jumai, you say thanks.
I think Peter just had his hand up. Is it related to that this
yes,
point? Yeah.
Oh no. So a quick question, also in relation to these perceptions about climate change. And then I realized that in the literature, there's the eco-emotion literature, which has to do with other people's perception about ecology and climate change and everything. They report both negative and positive eco-emotions. So I was wondering if in this study, they only look at the negative emotion, which is being worried, or there's also the tendency for positive emotions about climate change, because once the people are having access to innovations, then they are being more positive towards climate change, that they can take up new innovation that will make them more sustainable and practice more sustainable practices or approaches. So did that come out, or they only focus on the negative aspect?
Hannah, do you have an answer to this question? I don't.
No, I guess it links a little bit to WEAI's question too. So it was just asking about how worried they are in terms of, I mean, we can pull up the presentation again in terms of not very worried at all, somewhat worried. So that certainly doesn't capture nuances within that. But when I was referring to constraints, that was a separate assessment we did. And there was linking kind of also this clustering of low, medium, and high empowerment levels, and looking at the proportion of men versus women that answered for these categories that ended up being quite similar. So again, to the point that Anna mentioned, it was really interesting that in the survey, we didn't find large differences compared to the qualitative, where some of these differences came out more strongly. So both men and women have financial constraints that came out most strongly to making certain adaptation and mitigation decisions or actions, and also access to land, access to inputs, information on climate change. Those were really things that came out quite strongly in terms of constraints. Yeah, I hope, I mean, we started digging into these later than expected with support from David. So we're still open to suggestions and and can really take this forward in the report. Elizabeth and Hazel also have questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for this really great presentation and the work you guys are doing. I was really interested in the conclusion that Anne mentioned about how we need better measures of people's participation in decisions at the community level, because that's really important for climate change. And so I was just wondering, like how we should do this if we're going to develop an add-on module to the WEAI. I mean, we can ask people more detailed questions at the individual level about whether they influence decisions in the community level, in addition to, say, like, just being a member of a group. But I'm wondering if we might consider asking questions at the community level as well, like, norms about women's active participation in groups or other kinds of things like that, and whether women have influence on decisions at that level. And I'm not sure if that's been done before in any of the other WEAI add-on modules or tools. So I just wanted to raise that issue and flag it, and see if anyone from the WEAI team who's on the call might have some insights on how we might address these questions about sort of women's role in the community and climate adaptation. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hazel had her hand up, so you can also answer Elizabeth's question if you can.
I would say that the collective agency paper, for example, that Ruth and colleagues worked on might be a starting point, because they were looking at collective level stuff. I also want to flag that there were some kind of community or sort of group level instruments that were developed as part of the ANU project. I mean, of course, they were not focused on climate per se, but I think that approach at sort of collecting data at that level, we have maybe some lessons to draw from that point. So that would be my first. Basically my default is let's ask Ruth. maybe she probably has more to say about that. My point was really more on that takeaway around mixed methods and how do you interpret both together. So on the quantitative scores, like these are aggregate scores sort of showing the same thing across women and men and sort of not really showing differences, whereas in the qual it's kind of pointing to certain more different constraints maybe between women and men, and maybe even different women kind of have different ranges of constraints depending on how they're situated. I would say it would be interesting to unpack the quantitative results a bit more, because of course, when we're constructing an index, we're aggregating a lot of information and we're using like a cutoff, and they only count if they pass the cutoff. And sometimes what we find in some projects is that, even when you have movement within, on the score, if it doesn't move, go beyond the threshold, it sort of doesn't count. I'm using air quotes for those of you who can't see me. It doesn't count. So the overall aggregation will not reflect that, but the underlying data may reflect that. And so I think just looking at the components, and especially, for example, if you had a separate line on T, I think just looking at that line and what the responses are for that particular activity, for example, could be super interesting. So just kind of suggesting that you could use what you're finding in the qual to help direct your focus on which parts of the quantitative to kind of unpack a bit more. I don't know if anybody else I don't know. I'm gonna, if Agnes is still here, Agnes, is there more to say about collective agency and also around mixed method stuff?
No, I think you've made the right points already about collective agency. It's an area that we're increasingly giving more attention to, because a lot of these changes will have to happen at a scale which is larger than the household. And I think as Ruth and colleagues develop these collective agency indicators, it would be nice to see them applied across different settings, and this could be one of them, for example. But I also want to emphasize support Hazel's comment about looking at the individual indicators using the continuous version of pro-WEAI, because that's going to give you more insight as to which indicators are really contributing to your overall index. I mean, you could do, for example, the disempowerment bars, the composition, and look also at the individual indicators as Hazel mentioned. That's all. Thanks.
No, thanks both of you, Agnes and Hazel. I think in the report we will definitely, we are also to an extent already doing that, but we will definitely write more about this in the report and follow your advice on this. And maybe seek some additional advice from you as well.
Exactly. And actually, in particular, the connection to the Living Lab makes this community level participation or group participation all the more relevant. So this is something that maybe is unique to this learning grant, that we're looking at it in terms of the implementation within this actor space that the Living Lab reflects. And that really highlights the need to think about this community level these community level outcomes of empowerment also more strongly, or how to integrate those types of collective empowerment indicators in the future. So good questions also from Elizabeth and Hazel in this regard.
Yes, and also thank you for dropping the blog that Diana wrote in the chat, which is really about some challenges encountered during the data collection of the quantitative data.
Yeah, I meant to mention it at the beginning and I forgot. So yeah, that's the blog the team just recently published. Okay, any other last questions or comments before we close?
Can I quickly ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, so the Living Lab, if I may ask, how many times did they have to meet to interact and reflect on the learning process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know exactly, to be honest. Diana, do you have more? And maybe Marta, you can say something about Colombia, and maybe Diana about the Kenya Living Lab.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that well, the question. Can you repeat it, please, Peter?
Sorry, the question was that the Living Lab, how many times did they meet to interact and reflect on the learning process? Okay. I'm asking because we are currently implementing a project across West Africa and East Africa called Interfaces, and we are not using the Living Lab, but we call ours participatory platform, and we realize that we have a project of 3 to 4 years, and if we meet once in a year, it is not adequate for them to interact and learn. So we try as much as possible to meet 3 times in a year minimum. And you realize 2 continuous meetings, there's more avenue, there's more opportunity for reflection and learning. Yeah. That's why I'm asking this question.
Definitely. Yeah, like basically, I think it will depend, like for sure, more than once per year. That's for sure it should be. But I think that is the importance of the local host, right? Like we have a local host, meaning that they are in the territory and they meet constantly. Like I will say that they have been having meetings even, like, of course, it depends on the period of the year, but even once per month, like to do different activities or to reflect or to do like things related to the Living Labs. But I think that for that, because of course, like from CIAT, from the Alliance, like it will be difficult for us to be so often to the field. So I think that is where the local hosts play a really important role in maintaining this dynamic, right? Because maybe 3 times per year as well, the people will start to be less engaged or already forgot what they spoke in the previous meeting. So I think it depends as well on the context. We also try to not create something new, but kind of join something that it was already happening in the territory. So people is already engaged, people is already going to these meetings, they know the value of it. So yeah, that is what I will say. I don't know, Diana, in the Kenya case.
Yeah, so also in Nandi, through the local host, they get to meet, they selected an advisory board that gets to meet at least twice in a month just to discuss the progress of whatever activities they have going on. So I'd say they do meet quite often.
Okay. All right, thank you so much.
All right, I think we're right at time. And as mentioned at the beginning, this is the first webinar in this series, and our next one will be in about 2 weeks, Wednesday, December 4th, and the invitation will be out soon. I'd really like to thank the team for their excellent presentation today, and thanks everyone for your time, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Really appreciate the active participation, everyone.
Yeah, thanks,
everyone.
Thanks,
thank you so much, and we look forward to join the next one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.